Hey everybody, happy Monday and welcome to Your Full Crew. So great to see you all out there. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your co-host, and I have with us.
I'm Mike Peel, the other co-host, and we have two great guests today. Chriss Corgnati of MissionGO. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Chris?
Sure, yeah. Spent 25 years in the Navy, mostly flying aircraft, and got into the unmanned world towards the end of my time there. And I've spent the last 7 or 8 years in and out of a couple startup companies and consulting throughout the space. And joined Mission Go as the president about 5 or 6 months ago.
Awesome, and we also have Bronwyn Morgan, who is the CEO of Xeo Air. So, Bronwyn, what do you do over there?
Thanks. Yes, I'm the founder and CEO of Xeo Air. Xeo is an outsourced AI-based drone services, data analytics, and autonomous solution focused on inspection and mapping for critical infrastructure, civil infrastructure, and climate work. And I'm also a Part 107 and FA Drone Pro. So glad to be here this morning.
Yeah, so two heavy hitters as always. And you've brought us some great articles. We're gonna start off with something that Chris brought up about Amazon. So Amazon has some new robots joining its warehouse workforce. What did you think was important about this article, Chris? What do you want to highlight?
Sure, and I don't think it's about the specifics of Amazon or the specific robots. It's interesting that they're using them. To me, it's more a question of why are you using them and sort of how they're integrating with the workforce. As we look at the integration of technology, across many industries, we in the technology field tend to focus on the technology and assume it's always good and appropriate. We never sort of take the time to step back and say, what is the nature of work? Am I integrating it the right way to supplement or augment the capabilities of the human, or am I just replacing them? So that was the part of the article I found interesting. And, something we focus on at Mission Go is, we want to use unmanned or uncrewed aircraft for good, right? We want to do missions that make a difference, and missions that probably couldn't or wouldn't have been done without an uncrewed aircraft. So those are the kinds of things. That's where we like to apply the technology. Um, Vice just taking people out of the equation.
Yeah, Bronwyn, I mean, I'm sure you have some insights in this, especially since, there's a machine learning component to the work you do. So,
Absolutely.
so what do you think? Are the robots going to take over?
Yes, they definitely are going to take over. In all seriousness, as we're working on the robotic solutions, and drones are nothing but little flying robots, obviously in and of themselves. But I definitely, think that in the next 20 years, 25 years, drones as well as robots will be a big part of our workforce. And I think a lot of people have this kind of science fiction view of iRobot and others where robots are fairly sentient and are literally taking over. But I think they will be a great addition, especially in places where automation will speed up and create more efficiency, and for companies more profitability for the end user, quicker, faster, and hopefully more accurate service. And then especially in places where there's a dangerous environment and safety is critical, it'll be so important to have robots assisting in those operations. So I think everything from autonomous trucks, which will basically be terrestrial transportation robots, to warehouse robots and aerial robots, and then even perhaps I think I was hearing someone say earlier, even in the restaurant. And what does that mean for the future of work and humans? Opens up a whole new can of worms around, new training, new work roles, and new experiences for work, as we move into the future that will be very heavily tech dependent.
Yeah,
I
and I
wanted
mean,
to, oh, Chris,
oh,
I
go
was going to
ahead.
say, first of all, I wanted to thank you for this article. I thought it was really excellent. And I wanted to provide a little bit of context of what these robots are that we're talking about exactly that Amazon's introduced here. There's two of them, and they don't look humanoid at all. One is called Proteus. It is a fully autonomous robot that looks like a giant, not even giant, like just a larger lime green Roomba. And, by the way, both of these, they're use cases to lift very heavy objects that would be, as a kind of what Bronwyn said, dangerous for humans to do, right? A lot of torquing movements, lifting heavy things up onto shelves in warehouses. So that's what this thing is doing. I think as a lawyer, I'm like, how's it? It's fully autonomous. I guarantee some employee's going to trip over this thing. But anyway, the Cardinal is the other one. Now, this thing isn't floating around the warehouse. It's stationary. But literally, it looks like a giant robot. It just looks like an arm. It's got like a suction cup on the end, and instead of a hand. And what it does is it combines computer vision and artificial intelligence to pluck one package at a time, from a lineup. It'll read a label. If it's in the wrong place, it's going to stick it backward, and it can carry up to 50 pounds. So again, when you think about, Chris, to your point, not necessarily replacing the humans, but maybe, kind of giving them a break and doing these jobs that are tedious, that are dangerous, dull. What do we say? Dirty, dull, dangerous, sometimes deadly. And taking that spot, and then what can the humans do around them that's maybe more effective for humans to actually do, as opposed to reading some label and sticking something back on a conveyor belt that weighs 50 pounds.
Right.
So I think this is a really cool use case.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to get it back to what we do at MissionGO. One of our main lines of effort is in infrastructure inspection, and we're not what we're replacing or augmenting are guys flying around in a small Cessna or a small helicopter along power lines, which in and of itself is dangerous. Gets back to the dull dangerous, comment is taking them away from the power lines, putting a smaller, quite honestly, much cheaper to operate asset out in the field and getting much higher quality data. So the power companies or whatever infrastructure project you're looking at, you're getting higher quality data, helping them to preventive maintenance, to prevent wildfires, to prevent downtime, all those things. So that's a case where we're taking guys out of maybe a Cessna or a helicopter, but there's still human beings involved because they're in there operating the drone and analyzing the data in a much more efficient manner. So those are the kinds of use cases I think, it makes obviously perfect sense to apply the technology.
Yeah, so if automation is somewhat inevitable and we've been doing this throughout human history, I think what the main concern now is our ability to scale it pretty rapidly. I think the discussion has to happen almost on an individual industry level, what the impact is going to be on the persons that currently do this work. So warehouse housing has been this kind of incremental thing, and no warehouses are more automated than Amazon's already. What does that mean for, how much of the economy does that workforce take up in terms of labor? It's a pretty big chunk. So even though we're taking people out of harm's way, how do we still involve them? And is it even worth it to involve them for these tasks? Do we just become a pure services economy globally because we've automated all the dull, dirty, and dangerous labor?
I think the answer will be very situational, industry dependent, right? Over time, more and more will probably migrate that way, but I think, you have to look at the specifics of the use case to answer the question. I think you're right. It's not a universal.
Yeah, I'm going to call out from the chat. Our friend CJ is saying hello from Brooklyn today. So hopefully we'll be able to get CJ on as one of the talking heads one of these days. He works at Adorama in their drone division. Anybody else, if you want to ask questions in the chat, we'll be sure to get them up to our amazing guests. And while I have you, if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube. Make sure you hit the like button, hit that subscribe, and if you want to make sure you never miss an episode, the notification bell is the way to go. All right. So any final words, Bronwyn, on Chris's article before we move on to yours?
No, I mean, it's, a lot of what I'm going to say is very, down the same vein. I think we're all thinking the same thing as it relates to the future of work and where robotics of all types will come into play. And to Don's, perspective, these are not necessarily, bipedal robots walking around, although we will get to that. This really is kind of more of behind the scenes support. And it will force us to become more creative when we think about what the workforce of the future looks like and where do people, where do we play? I mean, there's obviously a direct role operationally with this type of equipment and technology where you're going to have people hands-on there because anything that's man-made, of course, falls apart. So that'll maintenance operations will become, I think, bigger role. But to the point you were making, Mike, I do see us becoming a lot more service-oriented as well as technical in our capability to everything from writing code to maintaining these systems. So we're not completely out of the loop yet, and that's where things like universal basic income might become a larger part of this discussion. But I'll table that for another
That's a
podcast.
whole other ball of wax.
Yes, it is.
Right. I mean, you could take the conversation in that direction ultimately, right? I mean, if you look
Mm,
at how many people are working in the gig economy, driving Uber or Lyft or other ride shares, if you go to an autonomous taxi or autonomous car fleet, then there's a bunch of people who have now supplemented their aircraft, their income, or created an entire industry that are now looking for something else to do. So
that's right.
interesting. You could certainly take it that far.
Hmm.
Well, and when you think about this and the workforce of tomorrow that we need, if the easy jobs, let's just call them easy, okay, like lifting a box, I mean, while heavy, maybe not the most taxing, duty to do mentally. Same thing probably with driving a Lyft or an Uber, right? You're picking people up, you're dropping them off, you've got an app that tells you where to go. If the jobs that we're going to need people to do are like engineering, are like programming, coding, I mean, we're talking a whole different level. And are we ready for that? I mean, that's just a whole different conversation about our education system and STEM and STEAM and kind of what we're doing to prepare for the workforce we're going to need to sustain these kind of industries if we're substituting out some of these easier jobs with maybe more, to use Bronwyn's word, technical type jobs. So it'll be interesting to be sure.
Well, Don, I think, I've also talked to a room full of attorneys in a consulting gig I was doing, and I said, "Hey, listen, AI will become so good that it can search case law in the United States and globally to come up with a perspective." And so, and in some, legal work is grunt work. You just, it's repetitive, it's grunt work, file this, do that. And, is it possible that it replaces even, these white collar jobs that we all think that we are adding so much intellectual value to? There's a great possibility that AI could replace a lot of us and even in our thinking and ideas and filling the gaps with less ego attached. So, that's an interesting part of what the future could look like. That's a ways off. We're not talking about the robots in the Amazon warehouse, but it's something we need to think about, especially coming up on what happened recently with the Google AI. That was interesting. I'm sure you guys all heard about that in the conversation with the developer or whomever the person was, and the AI basically stating, I am sentient. And it's like, you know, that is a really interesting, occurrence and something that we've all thought about, but it's now it has happened. And the system basically said, I am sentient. I'm very aware of myself, and I feel sad, and and I'm like, wow. And these were some of the first and earliest conversations with the tech. So, how far,
Yikes.
yeah, yeah. And then the whole lot, the laws and all that, and it is interesting. And but Don, I'll turn it back over to you because I'll share some of that as I think about my article.
No, well, good. Actually, it's a perfect segue into your article, Bronwyn, because, and I think you might have maybe a follow on, but the one we were talking about before we dialed up was 13 ways that commercial drones are changing work in 2022. So where are we today with drone technology in particular? And this is a good, I think, summary. I think it's focused mostly on DJI drones in particular, maybe an author or sponsored piece, but the 13 use cases, really applicable across the board for any drone OEM or provider. So, Bronwyn, if you could tell us a little bit about this article, why you picked it, and what your thought process is.
Well, it is, granted, yeah, it was, very focused on one manufacturer, but I think it really is more up to the services operators like myself, like a Chris, who are looking for, we're actually creating our own drone because we're not, there are a lot of different layers as to why, but people ask me all the time, especially those that don't understand what we do. Well, what do you guys do with these drones? Are you just up taking, I love it, are you just up taking pictures? And I'm like, yeah, in essence, it kind of is like that. It's more than that. It's video, it's hyperspectral, multispectral. They're like, what does all that mean? But it's coming into places that we had not thought about drones being used before. Of course, we all know they're used in public safety, infrastructure like what Chris and I do, inspection, ag, even with scientific research over the ocean with, aquatic wildlife, migration, all these different things. And I think there'll be more that will come up. But, one of the big things that I often hear, I had a lady, I was at a show, and she comes up and she was like, drones. And I was like, what? What's going on? And she said, my privacy. She had one flying above her property. And she's, this lady was probably in her, late 70s. And so we had a great conversation about it. And then I said, she was like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. So this is what I should do if I see one. And so we can, on the tech side, on the services side, on the business side, come up with, a lot of different business models, and I think that they can be very substantiated. However, it's, public perception and how do we really engage with the public on a lot of this new tech. But specifically with this article, I did like it because it just kind of, it went deeper than the standard construction and all the ones that we kind of know, into talking about other ways that drones are being used. And I think as we get into delivery, medical to, shoes and pizzas, the pedestrian uses along with the things that are, much more important and critical, will be a game changer, a lifesaver. And I think that then dovetails back into beyond the service, it's now the manufacturing. And it's, one of the biggest barriers that we have is battery life, fuel cells. And, as we're building our own, my intern, who's an aerospace engineer, we're looking at all different types of options. What makes the most sense to give you the range that you need, and then based on size, what makes the most sense, maintenance, operations, because as we're building autonomous capabilities, all those things become important. But I think we're going to start seeing drones in places that people didn't expect them. And as I said to someone the other day, you're going to be able to look out the window and your skyscape is going to change dramatically. You will see more drones. You will see larger, advanced aerial mobility flying by. And as long as we do that responsibly so as not to create aerial clutter, I think we're good, because, these examples of what we can do more efficiently, and to Chris's point, more economically and, faster, is very good. And I'm excited to be in the industry because of that reason.
I would love to hear Chris's perspective.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's actually 3 points that out of there that certainly resonate with me. First, is you talking about medical cargo, critical cargo. So MissionGO was actually born out of an event in 2019 where we transported the first human organ that was transplanted into a human being. It was a kidney here in Baltimore. So pretty cool origin story for the company. And we've continued to explore, and actually we just wrapped up a 2-week 40-flight demonstration with Airspace Link up in Detroit, Michigan. So we're out there trying again. Where does it make sense to apply the technology in time critical, high value situations where you got to get there, quickly and efficiently. So that certainly resonates with what we do and what we're about. The privacy issue, I sort of chuckled a little bit, because when I was still in uniform in the Navy, I had an opportunity to get out and speak to a bunch of civic organizations, and they would ask me to come and talk about, the drones, and inevitably I would get questions about, why are you spying on Americans? And I was like, hey, I'd explain Title 10, we don't. Trust me, here's how it happens. And I said, you're absolutely right to be concerned about civil liberties and personal privacy. But I said, there's nothing flying on an uncrewed aircraft or a drone that isn't available on a manned platform or some other vehicle. I said, the delivery vehicle in this case is a drone. It in and of itself is not doing any of those things, right? And that's always a hard sell for people, because they don't understand that it's the drone writ large that they want to look at, and that's what's, quote unquote, spying on them. So certainly we continue to run across this. I think the public sentiment has started to change a little bit, but I think that's certainly out there. And then the last piece is going through your list of 13. The commonality there, I think, is data, right? I mean, all the aircraft that we're flying, they're trucks that carry sensors that collect data. At the end of the day, this entire industry, it's a data-driven, we're collecting it, and either we analyze it ourselves or we pass it off to a partner who analyzes it and then presents it to the customer in whatever format they need. So I look at all those, and those 13 that were highlighted, they're I think, basically non-controversial at this point. Those seem to be it makes sense. Those are industries and use cases that it makes sense to apply the technology. And then we just need to look at it from, like I said, it's a data collection, processing, dissemination problem after that. That's really what we're doing.
Hey, Mike,
Chris, you're absolutely right.
Mike, I wanted to get your thoughts here, but before we do, I wanted to just real quick run through these 13, because, again, just to kind of have everybody, everybody operating from the same sheet of music here. I agree with Chris. I think that when you listen to these use cases, you're going to say that none of this is a surprise to me, especially if you're involved in the industry now. If you're Chris's mom and you dialed in, hi Chris's mom, I hope she did. She may not be familiar with all these, so I'm going to run through them real quick. So number one, wildlife protection and research, things like marine conservation and protecting endangered species. Number two, public health, things like what Chris just mentioned. Number three, renewable energy, whether solar and wind and other inspections that are affiliated with that. Number four, agriculture, precision agriculture. I think you mentioned that, Bronwyn. Number five, historical preservation, documenting things like, when, so when something happens, to make sure you have the documentation. Number six,
Notre
search
Dame.
and rescue.
That happened
Yeah,
with
I
Notre
was just
Dame.
thinking, yes, Notre Dame. My brain wasn't working, Mike, and I was thinking, okay, what's that?
The whole church was scanned just a couple years earlier.
Thank God.
And clearly it helps with the rebuilding effort. So we would have lost that to history.
Absolutely. Search and rescue, number six. Number seven, drone firefighting. Number eight, hazmat drones or hazardous materials. Number nine, aerial surveying. 10, drone inspections like power lines. 11, construction management. 12, mining. And 13, oil and gas. So, Mike, you're familiar with all of these. I mean, these are like standard use cases almost, with the exception maybe our historical preservation is one that you don't hear a lot about other than what you just said. Are there any, Mike, that aren't on this list that jump out at you as something that maybe should have been on this list, or something unique and novel that you've come across that we should be talking about?
Unique and novel. Maybe the use case hasn't been found yet, but we just got back from the PX4 summit, and I was seeing some of these new frames that might even revolutionize some of the 13 that are on the list in terms of delivery. So one of the coolest thing I saw was a drone that had basically 8 rotors, but they were aligned. Is it 8? Yeah, it was. They were aligned in such a way that basically this thing could maneuver 360 degrees in any direction it wanted. Which there might be a proprietary drone on the market that I don't know about that is capable of that. But the difference is this was released to the open source code base. So now that flight capability is possible for any drone. So if I think back to, what was it, Flytrex, or, I'm going to get the name wrong now, but they basically put a drone in like a plastic cage, and they would roll it through pipes in dangerous areas that you couldn't fit humans. So this is the type of thing like that, but now advanced to the point where we can maneuver basically like you're moving a 3D object in an editor. It's it's
Yeah.
almost like the physics don't matter. That's how much the code has become kind of resilient and adaptive. So
I
I'm sure
think
we'll
you're
And
see
talking
some
about
cool stuff with that.
flyability. Yeah,
or
I think you're
flyability, yep.
Flyability.
yeah, flyability, and they just released the Helios 3.
Helios, yeah.
Yeah,
Because it's
last
not just
week.
outdoor now; it's indoor.
Oh yeah, it's everywhere.
I was when we were down at AUVSI, and you're seeing a drone that was being used inside of a situation where the police are involved, and they're able to fly it through like a house or a building and actually speak to the suspect and say, "Hey, what do you want?" Especially in a kidnapping case, what do you need, and assess the situation right there. And so, yeah, these drones will not only be flying outdoors, but they will be indoors and also in the warehouse, process as well.
We
Obviously, it creates a navigation challenge that largely people have been able to overcome. But we do some first responder training here in the Mid Atlantic, and do advanced tactical training. That's one of the things folks are always interested in. I need something that can fly through the door or the window to do exactly what you said. I need to put eyes on or to communicate. In many cases, it's a great tool to do that. So
so
putting somebody through the door.
we got a comment from the chat. It's actually Danielle who's going to be on tomorrow on our Twitter Spaces from Volatus. So Notre Dame
Yeah,
was what got me hooked on drones and their benefits and environmental applications. So uh,
awesome.
yeah, thank you. I mean, that's one of the awe-inspiring ones. It was Romeo Dersher who was on our first episode
Hmm.
that actually told me about that use case. We tried to get the officer that flew the drone during the fire at the
Mm.
show. It was a female drone pilot. So,
Mm.
Woohoo.
um, so Dawn, you've got some real critical stuff for the drone industry coming up in your article. You want to tackle that now?
Yeah, I'm happy to cover this. So, fun fact, everybody, last Wednesday, in the middle of the Energy Drone Robotics Coalition, as we were breaking down our booths, apparently, the FAA held a public listening section on the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee, or the BVLOS ARC. And you can access that. That's all recorded online on YouTube. It appears that they gave everybody about 5 minutes of fame to like give their comments. And what I focused on for this was my buddy Rex Alexander, 5 Alpha. He is, world-renowned heliport and vertiport expert, licensed helicopter pilot. Had a lot of great comments about his concerns relating to essentially, the comments the ARC made relating to two specific things. Number one was the fact that, uh, helicopter and powered lift landing areas and their associated airspace, they need to be properly recognized, identified, and of course those assets need to be avoided. So not just drones, but we already have a whole ecosystem of helicopters out there. A lot of this doesn't even appear on a map. Throw up a bunch of drones into this ecosystem, how's that going to go? So that's his first concern, is this idea of we've got a lot of heliports out there that aren't even documented. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Number two, on top of that, we need to define and document drone ports. Okay, so he basically, and his comments are spot on, and I know Rex got cut off towards the end of his 5 minutes. He's going to be submitting documentation, so I'd commend everybody to keep your eyes out for this stuff, because if anyone knows what they're talking about in heliports, vertiports, drone ports, it's Rex. And what he's talking about with regards to heliports in particular is there are an estimated 2,000 or more, and Chris, this is relevant to you, hospital heliports in existence and in operations whose information is neither published or captured by the FAA at all. Plus, add to that about 8,000 pre-designated emergency landing areas, what they call PILAs, that are utilized by the helicopter air ambulance operators, law enforcement, Coast Guard, and other government agencies. Those aren't tracked by the FAA either. So in other words, you already have all of these like flying assets out there, landing and taking off from locations that aren't even, frankly, on a map. So add drones to that. And that's a serious concern. So that's all I'll say about that. But I read that, and that caused me, that made me pause, because when you think about safety, and you think about beyond visual line of flight operations in particular, if you don't know what you don't know, that's going to be a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're detect and avoid, or ground-based surveillance, whatever surveillance system you're using, because we know ADS-B right now is not a thing for drones. You as a pilot have to know what could be coming in and out of there, and that includes not only the helicopters, these potential, emergency landings. I know there's some manned aircraft or crewed aircraft as well, that don't require ADS-B and don't have any kind of transponders on them, working in the agricultural sector in particular. So what are we doing here? Like, we need a serious mapping effort, frankly.
Right.
And, when I think about someone that's already kind of started doing something like this, I know, Chris, you said you work with Airspace Link, they're out there. And I wouldn't say ATA is their competition, but ATA LLC, they created the Virginia Fix. And literally, John Eberhart went around, all around Virginia with a bunch of people, boots on the ground, and documented things, even ground-based infrastructure, that not just like heliports and things like this, but there's some facilities that don't appear on maps that could pose a problem as well. And so they incorporated all of that into this Virginia Fix, that pilots in Virginia have access to, the public does, and of course government agencies. So I'll stop talking about this, but I'd love, Chris, to hear your thoughts.
No, I mean, I think it goes beyond just the aviation world. One of the things that we've done in California with the current client is to verify the location of some of their assets and to correct them.
Yeah.
Because they say, hey, we need you to go out and visually inspect this. We go out and like, okay, well, it's not there. We found another one with the same asset tag number, but it's actually here. So we're helping correct their database. And again, these things were installed and created, potentially a lot of them pre widespread use of computers and probably GPS. So there's a lot of infrastructure in this country that was created before any of that, and now you're going back to try and digitally map and accurately map a whole bunch of things. And so I think this is just one example, but you're right, you can't make a rule that says I have to stay a half mile away from something if I don't know where that something is. It makes it impossible. So that, step one is knowing where all these things are, and then it's how do we operate relative to a heliport, a vertiport, or drone port, whatever the case may be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bronwyn, what do you think?
I 100% agree. I mean, the fact that there's so many unknowns out there is a hazard in and of itself, especially when you get to deep suburban and rural suburban areas, and specifically remote areas. There could be all kinds of operations, and for us specifically wanting to focus on remote areas, it is a big concern, because there's a lot of opportunity for inspection and mapping of assets, and as we also do climate and disaster, there almost anything could be coming at you, and you're completely unaware. And to your point, it could create a significant hazard. And so I think that, along with detect and avoid systems, will be very critical in how we operate. I think everybody wants to jump on BVLOS, us too. But we've got to be very, very careful to make sure that we have all the I's dotted and T's crossed before we do that, because we could find ourselves in a in a real pickle.
Hey,
Yeah.
Mike, what do you think?
So while everybody was talking, I was thinking of this conversation. I just recently had the conference with a person who's developing drones in Alaska. I'll keep his name out of it because the story is a little too funny for his name to be included, right? So he's developing drones and trying to get access to flights, COAs, etc., for experimental aircraft. And then he's seeing like a biplane take off, and he was talking with the air traffic control. It was like, and that's okay. And they're like, oh yeah, that's just old Willie. That's a historical aircraft. We don't worry about that. it clearly that it was not like ready for flight,
Wow.
right? So like should have been in a museum somewhere type of thing. So it's interesting sometimes where it's like if it ain't broke, don't fix it, or we're not seeing enough of a problem where this is an issue. But now we're faced with a fundamentally transformative technology that has this level of knowledge resolution as a requirement, right? So this is where it kind of becomes antagonistic between classic players and new players, and it's harder to get the ball rolling. But at least I mean it's being acknowledged publicly now in whatever format, and more conversation needs to happen. But when you just said that, Dawn, shock went through my body. Like really, like this is something that we should, we don't know every heliport in the United States, and we have pretty safe skies. That's kind of mind blowing that we haven't reached that resolution for that data point yet.
Well, this would have to be a critical part of UTM. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Yeah.
no way we could do that without it.
Well,
I mean,
and my concern is like, okay, so whose job is it, right? Because so often we'll hear from the FAA, like privacy, not our lane, right? Documenting the heliports, the extent that some of these are privately owned and don't even fall under FAA jurisdiction, like is it not our problem? But yet we govern, the airspace down to the lowest blade of grass for navigation rights. I mean, the other concern I have too is this going to get thrown back on industry almost like UTM in a way has been, right? We can't use ATC. We can't use air traffic control. It's going to overload the system. Can't use ADSB. So if I'm Chris or I'm Bronwyn and I'm doing a BVLOS flight, is it my duty, my responsibility to go along that entire route and ensure that I know what's out there and map it myself so that I'm not crashing into something? That I think that is my dual concern. One is it's going to get thrown on industry, and it's going to be ad hoc, and then how is there even going to be information sharing about it? Or secondarily, if it is the government does it, how long that's going to take? How long would that take? I mean, my guess is it hasn't happened for a reason. It's a resourcing issue. And that's not just manpower, that's money too, of course.
Right,
So,
and then you're running into competing interests even within government bodies, right? So if the FAA's mandate is to keep the sky safe, there's also a defense initiative that we help develop this technology as fast as possible, right? And we have DIU, right, where we're basically funding one side and saying slow down on the other. It's kind of interesting, and there's a lot of money behind that to make sure that we do advance on this technology and are competitive in the global market for it. You compare that to what's going, or I don't know, I haven't looked at it recently, but a couple of years ago, you could easily look at Swiss FOCA, and it was working in tandem with industry because the government had mandated that's what should happen. Figure it out. They called it open source regulation, which is still one of the most interesting, mind-blowing terms that I think will never make it to the United States.
I don't know, aren't we kind of doing that now? I mean, you got different people in industry and in government doing different bits and pieces of it without a coherent whole. So maybe it is sort of akin to an open source collaboration.
yeah.
Yeah, but the difference would be governance, right? It's actually a government, like, we're taking these steps, we want to hit this on this timeline. I mean, that could have some detrimental effects, too, because it means it's less experimental. But given the state of the drone industry over the years, I would think some focus, like, hey, this will be allowed, here's the plan, we know when we're going to release it, would help drive, as we just saw last week at the developer conference, what they develop, right? Because they want to know what they could actually make money on in 5 years or less.
Right.
Speaking of developing, I was just going to segue maybe, Mike, to your article. And, one of those things we need for Beyond Visual on Site is significant battery power. So this is about, automated driving systems and ground vehicles. But if you could tell us a little bit about this, I think it's a great segue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm almost just more interested in battery technology as a broad concept than the contents of the article, because it seems like battery life, battery environmental impact, how alternative battery chemicals that has to do with geopolitics too, and being able to source them and logistics, and therefore I think this is kind of like, you think of the hierarchy of needs. This almost comes before eating. If you don't have battery, you can't get much done in this world anymore. Um, and yeah, I just kind of wanted to open the discussion up to everybody's knowledge of battery technologies that are out there, what they're seeing in the drone space, because we got 2 drone speakers today. We had kind of talked hydrogen pre-tape, which I thought was further behind in development, but I'm hearing there's some frames out there. So, Bronwyn, you wanna take lead in terms of comments?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a big part of what we're doing and what we're facing also on the drone development side. The LiPo is that's the horse of the industry right now. For you to get the power that you need, the efficiency that you need, at a weight that is, reasonable for the standard, below 55-pound aircraft that most of us are flying commercially, and also from a hobbyist perspective. But, hydrogen, Harris Aerial has a couple of nice birds with the hydrogen pack. Or designed specifically for hydrogen. That doesn't necessarily work for what we're doing, but it's an option. There's the lithium, the Life battery, that is, another possibility, the LIFE. So, all of these are, under consideration, but the biggest issue we have is just that range issue. Which one can give us the longest range? And for me, it's without having to stop to do so much recharging in the field, or if I do, the mechanism that we're creating to make that happen, and also the cost efficiency of it. And then I think that's why we're seeing people move over to, the eVTOLs, just because you can pretty much, you know what you're getting, and you've got a consistent source. We're going to be using solar to power our rechargers. But it's just how much can that battery take, and then over time, how many charges can I get before I have to send my maintenance back out there to, kind of pull it out. But the last thing I want to say on this, and to the last point we were making before we talked about batteries, is you've got a lot of folks out here creating drones, and not all of them need to be certified, but I think we need to be really careful with all these little drones that are being created, because not all of them are necessarily airworthy. And if you're just a hobbyist having fun, that's fine. But people are creating things professionally that probably won't stand the muster and haven't done the appropriate testing that needs to be done on these kinds of aircraft for, pure safety. So.
So, Chris, you deal in a pretty zero-sum situation when you're doing something like an organ transfer. Like, I'm sure battery reliability comes into the thought process there, right? Because it's also
Right.
limiting the distances you could travel if you're trying to move these organs.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who, can crack the code and double the energy density of a battery is going to make a lot of money. But we haven't gone to any exotic chemistries because the cost benefit's just not worth it, right? So there's an economic point, and so we're using all commercial off the shelf right now, because the benefits of partnering with somebody, and you could spend a lot of money trying to build the next great battery, but I'd rather let other people spend their money creating the next great battery, and then we just use them when they're available. Um, that's sort of our approach.
Yeah, my largest concern is based on what you're saying, because it almost feels like a chemical roulette game, right? It's like, how long can the
Right,
computers and the available materials can we kind of combine together until we actually get something that makes sense, that is
right. And
available
something that's
in
readily
such
available.
mass. Yeah, exactly. So like we might have something that produces more power as a chemical composition. But there aren't enough of those materials worldwide where we could base a global industry off of it, right?
Right, you got to be able to scale off of it, which I thought was the interesting part of the article that you had is, iron ore, obviously pretty available around the world. So if that's the basis of it, and you're not getting, again, relying on certain countries for access to exotic chemicals,
Yeah,
maybe that's it.
that's another
Right,
thing I kind of want to highlight. So availability of these chemicals in which not companies, countries own the majority of that material. that impacts international trade, and as we've seen, the complexity of international trade, you could lose basically a fifth of the global economy because one leader makes a decision that it is terribly impactful on the lives of others, and now suddenly something like cobalt isn't as available, or transfer of it is more constricted. Where current trade partners were edgy about them now because of their relationship with that. Let's just say it, Russia. And so I mean, there's also like an imperative to find alternatives just for redundancy's sake, right?
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
All right, we're at 11:45. Filled the space rather nicely. Thank you so much for Bronwyn and Chriss for bringing in the articles. Great conversations as always. Dawn, you want to talk about some of the things that are coming up this week?
Yeah, so Mike, I know you're going to roll this. Tomorrow we're going to be doing Twitter Spaces for crew, so join us there. You have to use the distinct Twitter link for Twitter Spaces that we put out. You can't just find full crew on Twitter and then figure that out. So we'll be sending that out here in a minute. We've got Danielle Gagne, the storyteller for BVLOS Aerospace, joining us, as well as Major General James Poss, United States Air Force retired and CEO of ISR Ideas. So that's going to be a great session. Join us on Twitter Spaces. Drop an audio chat so you don't even have to shower. How's that? Wednesday on the Dawn of Drones, we've got Julie Garland, CEO of AvTrain out of Ireland, doing incredible things. We've been talking about beyond visual line of sight. Julie's doing it. She's doing training. She started another company called Vertex. Hear all about it Wednesday, normal time on Drone Life TV, 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Eastern. And then Thursday on Clubhouse, we're kicking off our next month theme for Dawn of Drones, which is going to be Innovation Month. And we've got, talk about navigation, Chriss and Bronwyn. We've got Jason Chriss from Class G, who's created, let's just call it a somewhat controversial toll system for the sky. So if you're intrigued, you should join us on Clubhouse and then on the Dawn of Drones next week when he'll be our guest there. So we've got some additional roll for next Monday and next Tuesday as well. I'll let that go, and we are really calling it a wrap. So we are out here.
Yeah. Just one note: we're actually taking next week off.
Oh, that's right.
Right?
It's not next week. Yes, it's the holiday weekend. So we're taking next week off. Join us back on, thank you, Mike, July 11th. So
and
we'll roll those now.
And if you can't get the Twitter Spaces link, feel free to follow me at Mike Peel. That's P-E-H-E-L on Twitter, and I'll send it over to you also. But subscribe to our email list, and it's coming in the email tomorrow too. So thank you, everybody, for joining the crew. We're out here.
Thank you.